Hello, my name is Adam Letman and I'm going to be teaching the Grade 5 Music Theory course online. And the topic that we're going to cover today is intervals. Now, intervals make up a relatively small part of the exam. On average, the marks will be between 10 and 12. But that is, taking into consideration the rest of the exam, that could be a pass or a fail. So it's essential that we get the intervals covered and learned in a good amount of detail, so that when it comes to the exam, you don't have anything to worry about. No matter what interval comes up, you will have a really good idea of how to answer them. Now, the interval questions are always 2 marks per question. The first mark is always awarded for the numerical classification. Now, that's saying it's a third, it's an octave, it's a fifth, the number part of the interval. The second mark is awarded for the classification of the interval, saying whether it is major, minor, perfect, augmented, or diminished. Now, if all of this sounds unfamiliar to you, that's nothing to worry about. We are going to cover everything. We're also going to cover compound intervals in case they come up. But everything at the minute will probably sound unfamiliar and it might even sound difficult. But by the end of this lesson, we will have covered everything. And the great thing about this being recorded is that you can always go back to the video. I'm going to explain everything in detail. And if there's anything that you've missed or you weren't sure about or whatever, rewind it, go back to the beginning and take your time with it. So let's start at the very beginning. What is an interval? An interval is kind of a way we analyse music. It can also be used in transposition. For example, transposing by a minor third or transposing by a perfect fourth. Intervals come up in exams because as musicians, it's pretty important that we know what they are, particularly if you're going to play in a band, if you want to write music, or if you're in an orchestra. Another time that intervals have come up quite a lot since I did my grade 5, which was in like 2015, it was ages ago, is that quite often if you do gigs and things like that, particularly if you play woodwind or brass, you'll be given music that doesn't really fit your instrument. It's not transposed, so you'll have to transpose it by a minor third or a major second. And it's important that you know what these intervals are. It'll advance you as a musician quite a bit, actually. So that's what we're going to cover today. And we're going to do it bit by bit, and you can pause the video and rewind it and do whatever you need to do so that you understand everything. So before we begin, there's one thing I'm going to ask. Could you please get a piece of paper, big as you want, small as you want, and a pen or a pencil? And on this piece of paper, I want you to draw me a keyboard. Now, I want the keyboard to be an octave and a fifth, say, so like C to G, or 2 octaves, just as long as it's more than 1 octave. That's all that matters. So if you can go and get that, I'll wait a couple of seconds and then we'll get started on this lesson. Okay, so I'm going to screen share my Sibelius file and we're going to begin. So we're going to start with the easiest intervals to recognise, which are major intervals. Now, that's when we get to the classification part. For now, we're just going to do the numerical part of the interval, and that is your first mark. All you have to say is the correct number that applies to this interval. And the way we do it, let's take the first one for an example, actually. So we've got C and E. Now, the way we work out intervals numerically is we start on the lowest note and we just count up the major scale. So C to E. C is always 1. The lowest note is always 1. So C, D, E. 3. This is some kind of third. Could be major, could be minor. For now, we're doing numbers. It's a third. That's the important part. C to E is some kind of third. Let's do the next one. C to B. Okay. So we're starting on the lowest note, same as we always do, and that is number 1. We're going to go up to B. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. It's some kind of 7th. Now, what would this one be? This is a second, because C, D is 2. It's some kind of second. Now, the last one is not an exception to the rule, but you call this an octave. It's just an octave. C to C, I'm sure you already know what an octave is. That's an octave. Before that, though, we have, a sixth. So what would a sixth from C be? Remember, C is 1. What would it be? It would be A. C to A is a sixth. Now, we're using C as an example here. It can be any note. The most important thing that you remember is that the first note, or the lowest note, is number 1. No matter what that note is 1. So, if we did, for example, D to B, numerically, what is this? See if you can work it out on your own. This is a sixth. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B. Sixth. And it's as easy as that. It's literally just counting from the first note. Now, I said we use the major scale. We do this just as a sort of process of elimination, which is something that we're going to come back to. For now, use the major scale. So let's do a couple ones starting on various notes. So D to B, we've done. F to B is a fourth. B to E, we have another fourth. And then A to G, what is this? This is a seventh. We start on the lowest note and we just count up. Now, I said about using a major scale. The numerical part of the interval, if you got them right and you've understood what I've said, that's 1 mark. You've already got 1 mark. So if it was 12 marks in total, you would have 6 marks. Just for saying the number, it's great. It's, you know, this is a good way to get easy marks in the exam. You just got to count from the lowest note, which is always number 1, upwards. So let's get on to the next part, which, you know, the first part of this, the number part, took us a couple of minutes to learn. The next part is much more detailed. So what I encourage you to do is take notes as I'm talking, or pause the video at various points, note down what I've said, rewind it, fast forward it, whatever you need. So the next part is the second mark in these questions, which is the identification of the interval. So for the sake of ease, let's do everything on C for now. So C to E, and then let's do C to B, C to D, and C to A. Okay, so C to E. The first thing we ever did was, in this lesson, was establish that this is called a third. C, D, E, third. Now, that's the numerical part. The identification part of this is E in a scale of C major. It is. It's the third note in a scale of C major. C, D, E. That gives us our first full interval that we've covered. This would be called a major third. And that would be 2 marks because you've done the numerical part and you've done the identification. Major third. This one is B in the key of C. Yeah, it is. It's the 7th note. So this is a major 7th. It's the 7th note in a scale of C major. Major 7. C to D, a major 2nd, because D is the 2nd note in a scale of C major. C to A major 6th, because A is the 6th note in C major. Now, intervals that are major or minor are seconds, thirds, 6ths, and 7ths. All of those can be major or minor. Now let's cover the minor part of this. So that was C major. If we make all of these minor, this would become E flat. Now the reason that we know this is minor, if we go up a scale of C major, there is no E flat. So it can't be a major third. It can't be, it doesn't fit in that scale. So if you see C to E flat, you will know that can't be a major third, because in a scale of C major, there's no E flat. However, in a scale of C minor, there is. It's the 3rd note, C, D, E flat. We would call this then a minor third, because C to E flat in a scale of C minor is 3 notes. Minor third. C to B flat, a minor 7th. It is the 7th note in a scale of C minor. Now, a second is slightly different. If there is a semitone between what we're going to call the root note, the lowest note in the interval, C, and the next note, we call this a minor 2nd. Now, a scale of C minor doesn't have a D flat in it. So, this is the only exception to that really, is that a semitone above the root is called a minor 2nd. Also a semitone. So, if we had, for example, D to E flat, well, there's no E flat in a scale of D minor, but it is still classified as a minor 2nd. So, if your root note is a semitone lower than the next note, that's a minor 2nd. Another example, E to F, that's a minor second or a semitone. And then the last one here, C to A flat, a minor sixth, because A flat is the sixth in a scale of C minor. Now, all of these that we've gone over are applicable to every key. You just have to use the sort of process of elimination that I was using before. Does it fit in the major scale? No. Does it fit in the minor scale? Yes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you various notes here. Not just C, I'm going to start on a couple of different notes. And I want you to answer the intervals as to what they are. It will only be what we've covered up to now. Just remember that the root note, or the lowest note, that determines the scale that you're going to use. So if it was D, your first note was D, you're going to go up a scale of D major or D minor. If it's E flat, you're going to go up E flat major, E flat minor. So I'm going to change these about, and then I want you to have a go at them. Once they're completed, I would suggest you pause the video, write the answers, and then I'm going to read out the answers and explain them. So the first one that we're going to do, D to F sharp, F natural to D, E to G natural, and F to E. Okay, so if you want to pause the video now, make a note of these and answer the questions. Okay, so these are the answers. D to F sharp, that is a major third. This is because F sharp is the third in a scale of D major, making it a major third. D, E, F sharp. F to D, this is a major sixth. This is because D is the sixth note in a scale of F major. Number 3, E to G. This is a minor third. E to G sharp would be a major third. So if we go up a scale of E major, E, F sharp, G sharp, well, this isn't a G sharp, it's a G natural. So then we change to the minor scale. E, F sharp, G. It is there, so this is a minor third. The last one, F to E. This is a major seventh, because the seventh note in a scale of F major is E. So they're the major and minor intervals. They're fairly straightforward. It's just a case of knowing your major and minor scales. Something else that you can do in your grade 5 exam is draw a circle of fifths before the exam starts. As in, while the exam's going on, I don't mean take notes into the exam. Never do that. What I mean is, when you're in the exam, draw a piano and draw a circle of fifths. Just in case at any point your mind goes blank or you're struggling with doing something, just write it down. So when you sit at the table and the exam starts, you got your piece of paper, you're allowed a bit of scrap paper, circle of fifths, piano, stand you in good stead for the exam. Okay, so we've covered major, we've covered minor. Now, we've still got a couple more topics to cover, but the next one is perfect intervals. Now, perfect intervals are fairly straightforward, actually. The only intervals that can be perfect are fourths, fifths, and octaves. Now, what I mean by this, let's take D as an example. D to G, you wouldn't call this a major fourth. D to A, you wouldn't call it a major fifth. That doesn't exist. You only have perfect. So you have D to G is a perfect fourth. D, E, F sharp, G. D to A, D, E, F sharp, G. A is a perfect fifth. Now, the cool thing with fourths and fifths is that in the minor scale and in the major scale, fourths and fifths stay exactly the same. So do octaves. So that's why they're perfect. They don't change. So if you have D to A, perfect fifth. If you have D to D, that's a perfect octave. This is a perfect octave. Other examples, E to A is a perfect fourth. F to F, a perfect octave. And then if we did a difficult one, so if we did E flat to B flat, that's a perfect fifth. It doesn't change whether it's major or minor. Fourth and fifth stay exactly the same. Now, it's crucial that you remember only fourths, fifths, and octaves can be perfect, and they will never be major or minor. That's not a thing. You can only have perfect fourths, fifths, and octaves. So let's recap what we've done again with a couple of tests. So let's do Okay, have a look at these intervals, pause the video and try and complete it yourself, and then I'm going to read out the answers. Okay, so the first one, E flat to A flat. Now, what is that? That's a perfect fourth. This is because A flat is the fourth in a scale of E flat, major and minor, so it's a perfect fourth. F to C, a perfect fifth. G to B flat, that's a minor third, and then D to C sharp, we have a major seventh. So we've covered major, we've covered minor, and we've covered perfect. So the next thing that I would like to cover is diminished. So, in fact, diminished and augmented, we'll cover them together actually. So, to diminish means to make smaller, and to augment means to make bigger. Now, in relation to intervals, so if we take C, let's go back to C. Now, if we have C to F, I said this is a perfect fourth, which it is. What happens if we change what a perfect interval is? So, for example, with a major interval, if we flatten it, it becomes minor. Well, with a perfect interval, what if we raise it by a semitone? So we have C to F sharp. Now, what we call this, when we have a perfect interval that is made bigger, we call that augmented. So this here is an augmented fourth. Now, the crucial part to remembering this, always establish the numerical part first. That is the most essential part. We want to make sure that that bit is, spot on. So C to F, so it's some kind of fourth, C, D, E, F, has to be some kind of fourth. It's not a perfect fourth, it's bigger, so it must be an augmented fourth. Now, the opposite of augmented is diminished. C to G, this is a perfect fifth. So if we imagine sort of a scale, perfect fifth, if we flatten the fifth, we've made perfect smaller. This is called a diminished fifth. Now, these two intervals actually give the same note. F sharp and G flat are the same. But this is where the exam will kind of get you out if you're not using the numerical part. Even though it produces the same note, those are different intervals. C to F sharp, it's an augmented fourth. It's some kind of fourth. If you don't establish that it's a fourth of some description and just say, oh, it's C to G flat, you would get it wrong because it's not G flat, actually F sharp. It's an augmented fourth. Similarly with this one, although it gives the same note, C to G, it's some kind of fifth. We're flattening the fifth, so it's a diminished fifth. Very important to remember. Now, there's another thing that's unique about these two in particular. So an augmented fourth and a diminished fifth create something called a tritone. Now, a tritone is 3 whole tones, or 6 semitones, if you want to refer to it like that. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is, in the exam, if you're not sure whether it's a diminished fifth or a perfect, or a augmented fourth, you can say a tritone if it's 6 whole tones. Now, by that, I mean C to D is 1 tone, D to E is another tone, and then E to F sharp is another tone. Whole tones. Now, a tritone will only get you 1 mark because you haven't established the numerical part. But if your mind goes blank and it's 6 whole tones, 3 whole tones, 6 semitones, then you can say tritone, but you will only get 1 mark. It is much better to establish the numerical part of it first. So let's do a couple more. G to D is a perfect fifth. If we flatten it, it's a diminished fifth. Perfect made smaller is diminished. If we have, now this is a common one actually that examiners kind of use to test your knowledge. F to B flat. Now, F to B flat is a perfect fourth. The reason for this is, in a scale of F major, B flat is the fourth. It's the perfect fourth. If we naturalize it, flat, so this is a perfect fourth, but because it's a B flat and it's naturalized, it's getting bigger. So this is an augmented fourth, because B flat is the perfect fourth of F, and we're making it bigger because it's a B natural, not a B flat. So this one is an augmented fourth. So let's recap what we've done. We always use the lowest interval as number 1. we count up and we establish the numerical part of the interval. 1 mark. We determine whether it's major, minor, perfect, augmented or diminished, the 2nd mark. And we do this by a process of elimination. If it doesn't fit the major scale, it's probably minor. If it doesn't fit major or minor and it's a 4th or a 5th, it's diminished or augmented or an octave. So now that we've covered that bit, let's kind of interweave them all together a little bit. Now this video as well, we've done it in terms of difficulty, so we started off with the easiest type of interval and we're getting further and further. This is probably the most difficult level of what was kind of establishing here in terms of interval. It's kind of a mixture of all of them. So what I'm going to do is refer it back to C again. So if we have C to E, this is a major third. A major third, you know, we've got it like that. If we flatten the root, it's gone like that. And then if we sharpen the third, it's really, you know, it's the widest interval that we've got in terms of, you know, major, minor, augmented, diminished. This would be an augmented third because we've got a major third and we've made it bigger in both directions. An augmented third, and that applies to all the other intervals that we covered at the very beginning, all the major and minor intervals. If we make them bigger in both directions, it would be augmented. Another example is if we would do D to B. If we make the bottom note wider and the top note wider, by wider I'm thinking in terms of a keyboard, so D to B, we've moved it bigger, and then B, we're going to sharpen it, so it's wider again. And here we have an augmented 6th. Now the opposite of augmented, remember augmented means to make bigger, so this is the biggest interval, is diminished. So if we have C sharp and E flat, this is a diminished third. We had major, C to E, C sharp to E, we've gone smaller, and then C sharp to E flat, even smaller. This is a diminished third. Similarly with D, if we do D natural, make these both naturals, we're going to make the D a sharp and we're going to make the B a flat. So it's a really narrow interval. This would be diminished. So here we have a diminished 6th. And that applies for all the intervals that we covered at the beginning. All the intervals that can be, you know, major or minor. If they look really complicated like this, that, you know, there's a good chance it's a diminished or an augmented interval. As long as you remember the diminished ones, it's the smallest possible interval that we can get. Usually you'll find the bottom note will be a sharp and the top one will be a flat. For augmented intervals, we have it where the bottom note is a flat and the top note is a sharp. So it's kind of like the opposite of a diminished interval. Augmented interval would look like this. So if we had D flat to B sharp, it's an interval at its widest. So let's do 8 intervals that recap everything we've done before we move on to the final thing, and then we're finished. Then we've covered everything that you'll need to know. So I'm just going to write out some intervals now. I'll do 8 of them, and, you know, just to recap everything that we've done. Okay, so I'm going to highlight these intervals in blue, and I want you to try all of these, please. Give them a go, and then I'll read the answers. So if you want to pause the video now, do it, and then I'm going to read the answers out. Okay, so our first one, D to B flat. This is a minor 6th. That's because B flat is the 6th in a scale of D minor. F to B, this is an augmented 4th. This is the one I said earlier on was can be used to sort of trick you out. B flat would be the perfect fourth, F to B flat, but that's been made natural, so it's an augmented fourth. Number 3, G to D, this is a perfect fifth. Number 4, F to E natural, this is a major seventh. G to A flat, this is a minor second. F sharp to C flat, this is a diminished fifth. E to G sharp, that is a major third. And E flat to C sharp, that is an augmented sixth. So the final thing that we need to go over is compound intervals. Now, I said each level of this would get more difficult. The augmented and diminished intervals was kind of the peak of that. This is just like a little add-on, like a little rule to add on to what we've done. So we'll get rid of these. Now, all a compound interval means is it's outside of an octave. It is literally that. It just means it's over an octave. So let's go back to C. So the first interval that we did in this lesson was C to E. So this is a major third, right? But what happens if we put the E up the octave? So if we have C to high E, well, it's still a major third. We just call it a compound major third. Compound means outside of an octave, major third because it's the third of a major scale. Now, some people write major tenth for this, the tenth being literally C to high E. You know, C would be 8, D9, E10, it's in the major scale, major tenth. I find that sort of a bit long-winded to do. It's much easier to just say complicated, I was going to say, compound. Compound is easier, and also it saves you having to count sort of past 8. If you just put compound before major third or before whatever answer it is, you get the same marks as saying major tenth. There's no difference. Another example, if we do F to top C, this is a compound perfect fifth. Compound because it's outside of an octave, perfect fifth because it's C, which is the fifth in F major and F minor. Another one, if we did F to top B, this would be a compound augmented fourth because F to B is an augmented fourth, outside of an octave, compound augmented fourth. The last one that we're going to do is F to G flat, a compound minor second. Minor second because the semitone above the root, compound over an octave. So that is everything in terms of the grade 5 intervals, what you need to know. That's everything that is in the syllabus, everything has been covered. If you're unsure about anything, feel free to email me. Feel free to go back over the video, pause it, rewatch as much as you want, as long as you're certain that what you're going into the exam with is the knowledge that you're comfortable with all of these. That there's nothing that you're unsure about. And if there is, feel free to email me. That's not a problem. Thanks for watching, and best of luck with the exam when you take it.